All right, so let's do this thing. This is the answers for the observations and inferences. I have them listed as observations and a hypotheses. A hypothesis and an inference is basically the same things. There's only a slight difference between the two definitions. So when I have mine, it says O and H, but this really should be O and I. And I'm going to go with this one first. Okay, so this one says the people on the bottom floor have the least amount of detail, the people on the top floor have the most. And my inference is that might suggest what the social classes are. The more detail, the more powerful. So let's take a look. If we look in general, the figures on the top, I see some facial features and some features of their attire. I can tell what uh, their dress or whatever this piece of clothing was made out of. I cannot, however, I might see some noses and some eyes, but I don't have nearly the level of detail that I have up here, where I can see like ankle bones and stuff like that. That probably suggests, but ooh, let's get rid of my big huge head. Um, that probably suggests the level of detail is how important that figure is. So that might mean that this is the social structure: your upper class, your middle class, and your lower class. That's almost edges into economics as well. Social structure and economics tend to combine forces a lot, since social structure is how wealthy you are. So that might lend itself to another thing in my economics box. The figures on the top tier have more detail to their clothing than the bottom. Just like today, fancier clothing is generally worn by people in the higher class. Could it be the same then? So if I look at their dress or their clothing, it seems to be far more detailed. And in general, the more detail oriented you are, more than likely the shirt that's really, really fancy is also really, really expensive. In general, that's not always the case today, but it's in general what it probably was, especially back then. So that might suggest that these definitely are wealthy people due to their detailed clothing. Another one is there's one guy who's bigger, better, and more detailed than the rest. He's the Starman. He's probably the most important figure and some sort of leader. Again, since he has the most detail, like I can see a lot about him, I'm going to make him bigger and me bigger at the same time. Okay, so, whoa, I made him way too big. All right, there he is. So I can see like part of his ear and his hair and his nose and all sorts of ankle parts. And this is not an extra leg. This is just part of his throne. So there is a ridiculous amount of detail to that figure. That suggests that he's probably the most important. Detail equals importance. And my inference is he's probably the leader, or at least a very important member of this society. Another politics one: in front and behind Starman, there's people in a defensive stance. What might that suggest? So if I look, I have a guy kind of going like this, right? So, and then a guy in front of him with his arms crossed, kind of like this. Right? So he is trying to make sure that nobody can get through him but this guy. And I could tell you who this guy is in a little bit. And then there's another guy who's like ready to fight anybody who comes up behind him. That suggests that this person is so important that they have to have some sort of protection. These people may be bodyguards. Now, I don't have any proof of that. I might have to do some research to find it, but that's my inference. I can tell you that this guy is what the Egyptians would call a vizier, and he's the head official that kind of is the main go to of the leader. And he's probably the only one that gets to be behind the guards. And by the way, in general, if there is an assassination of a king, it's usually by the person who's inside of the group. So that's who this guy is. He's the main advisor to the king, and he gets to be in behind this guard here. Anyway, so we have some more economics. There's no animals on the top floor, but there are animals on the bottom floor. Could that suggest that if you worked with an animal, you probably were not a member of the upper class? I mean, I see some animals here, but no animals up here. Social structure. Everyone is facing the man except for the guards on the top level. Is that because he's the most important? Could it be because he is the most important member of the highest of the social structures? So not only is he the most detailed, you may have noticed that everybody is facing him on his floor, except for the bodyguards who are not facing him because their job is to protect him. Okay, so that might be another thing that shows you that this figure is very important. It also may suggest as to who these figures are. You might have said that they are people who are working for him, since it looks like they may be drinking a glass, like in honor of him. Or some people have said it looks like they may be scribbling things down with their hand. It almost looks like one hand is holding a tablet and the other is writing something down. Depending on what you see there, you could interpret that they're toasting him, having a celebration, or they could be writing down stuff that he's saying. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, we seem like we have some guy playing an instrument of some sort. That's this guy right here. He's a member of the upper class, suggesting that the more skill you had, that may suggest that you're wealthy. Think about in our society today, the most skilled musicians tend to have a fairly decent living and a decent salary. Not every musician, but certainly the most skilled musicians. The most skilled artists are the ones that are hired to do their artwork. So these are all ways that you could summarize some of the observations and hypotheses. I have a couple others. There may be only one female who's drawn. Could that suggest that females are not as important in this society? So we have one female. At least I think she might be female for two reasons. One is that she has very long hair. The other is if I connect her eyes to the other eyes, I might even have an idea of what female that person is based on the eye contact that that figure and that this figure has. Um, Gives you suggestion, another inference that you might have as to who this figure might be. So that gives you some information. Now, with all of those things, and you don't have to write down every single one of them, I now want to ask you two questions. The first is, which of your hypotheses seems to have been the most accurate based on our conversation that we just had? And second, if I gave you this new one, this new standard, which is the peace panel, what evidence do you see in there that you could apply to this same thing? So, what might this tell you? What might this tell you? And why is it called the war panel when the front one, the one that we did in class together, was called the peace panel? What evidence does this one have? And again, you want to have observations and then you want to make an inference based on that evidence. All right. So, that is the rest of today's assignment. Where's the little stop button? I'm going to have to cut that out.